All right. Our next reader is Lucas. He's a college student in Eastern Nazarene College, and he's going to read a story from Edgar Allan Poe. I'll let him read it.
Yes, I am. So, yes, as I was just introduced, I'm Lucas Papa. Good evening. I've got one of Poe's best-known classics to read for you guys tonight, in fact. And whenever I read this short story from my phone in front of a crowd, which I do have a history of doing, I always like to imagine that I have become the silencer of the Telltale Heart myself. Maybe even that I'm somehow anachronistically vlogging or blogging about my crimes to a dedicated online following, to a bunch of subscribers and fans. It's exactly what I would do if I had become the psychopathic narrator of this story. And I hope that's enough to lend this reading a tiny extra bit of spookiness for you guys. And I'm sure to make you at least a little uncomfortable with my pacing. So. Telltale Heart. It's true. Yes, I have been ill. Very ill. But why do you say that I've lost control of my mind? Can you not see that I am not mad? Is it not clear that I am not mad? Indeed, the illness has only made my mind, my feelings, my senses stronger, more powerful. My sense of hearing especially became more powerful. I could hear sounds I had never heard before. I hear sounds from heaven, and I hear sounds from hell. Listen, and I will tell you how it happened. You will see, you will hear how healthy my mind really is. It's impossible to say how the idea first entered my head, though. There was no reason for me to do what I did. I didn't hate the old man. I even loved him. He had never hurt me, and I didn't want his money. I think it was his eye. His eye was like the eye of a vulture, the eye of one of those terrible birds that watch and wait while an animal dies and then fall upon the dead body and pull it to pieces to eat it. When the old man looked at me with his vulture eye, a cold feeling went up and down my back. Even my blood became cold. And so, finally, I decided that I had to kill the old man and close his eye forever. And I would. So, you think that I'm mad then, but a madman can't plan like I have. But you should have seen me plan like I did. During all of that week, I was as friendly to the old man as I could have possibly been. As I could have reasonably been. During that whole week, every night at about 12 o'clock, I slowly opened his door, and when the door had opened wide enough, I would put my hand in and then my head, and in my hand I held a small light covered up with a cloth so that it just wouldn't show, and stood there quietly, carefully, for just a little before lifting the cloth and letting a single thin, small light fall across that eye. And for 7 nights I did this. 7 long nights. Every night at midnight, always the eye was closed, so I had been stopped in my tracks. The work was impossible to do, for it was not the old man I felt I had to kill. It was just his eye. That evil eye. And every morning I went to his room with a warm, friendly voice, asked him how he'd slept. Couldn't guess, possibly. He couldn't possibly have known that every night, just at 12, I had looked in on him in his room, and every morning, and the 8th night, I was more than usually careful as I opened that door, for the hands of a clock moved more quickly than did my hand that night. Never before had I felt so strongly my own power, my own abilities. I was now sure of success, for the old man was there, not dreaming that I was at his door, not moving. When suddenly he did, and you may think that I had become afraid, but no, the darkness in that room was thick and black, and I knew he couldn't see me. I opened the door slowly, continued to push it. Softly, I put in my head, then my hand with the covered light, and suddenly the old man sat up in bed, crying, "Who's there?" The old man, but I still stood quite still. For a whole hour I didn't move, nor did I hear him lie down again. He just sat, listening. And finally, when I did hear a sound, a low cry of fear which escaped from him, I just knew he was sitting up in bed, filled with fear, terrified. I knew that he knew I was there. He couldn't see me, but he did know I was there. He felt me there, and must have known that death was standing beside him. Slowly, little by little, I lifted the cloth, until a small, thin light escaped from under it to fall upon that vulture's eye. And it was open, wide open. As my anger just increased, it looked straight at me. I could not see the old man's face, but for that eye, that hard blue eye, and the blood in my body became like ice in that moment. Have I not told you that my hearing had become unusually strong by this point, because I could hear a quick, low, soft sound all at once, like a clock heard through a wall, but it wasn't. It was the beating of the old man's heart. As I stood there, quietly, the beating sound grew louder, and the old man's fear must have been great indeed. As the sound grew louder and louder, my anger became greater and more painful. But it had become more than anger at this point. In the quiet night, in the dark silence of that bedroom, my anger became fear. For the heart was beating so loudly now that I was sure someone must hear it. The time had come. I rushed into the room crying, "Die! Die!" And the old man gave a loud cry of fear as I fell upon him and held the bed covers tightly over his head. Still his heart was beating, though. But I smiled as I knew success was near. For many minutes that heart continued to beat until at last the beating stopped and the old man was dead under my fingers. I took the bed covers away and held my ear over his heart where there was no sound. He was dead. He was dead. Dead as a stone, and that eye would trouble me no more. So I am mad. You say, at least. You should have seen how careful I was to put the body where no one would find it, though. First cutting the head, then the arms and legs off, careful not to let a single drop of blood fall to the floor where it might be spotted. I pulled up 3 of the boards that formed that floor and put the pieces of the body down there, laying the boards back carefully over it so that no human eye could see that they had ever been moved. As I finished my work, I heard that someone was at the front door, though. It was 4 o'clock in the morning now, but still dark, and I had no fear. As I went down to open the door, 3 men stood there, 3 officers of the police. One of the neighbors must have heard the old man's cry and called them. These 3 had then come to ask me questions, presumably to search my house. So I asked them to come in. The cry, I said, it was my own. Of no matter. The old man gone to see a friend in the countryside. I took them through the whole house, telling them to search it all to look well, feeling quite comfortable, quite pleased with myself. Finally, as if I were playing a game, I led them to the old man's room, asked them to sit down, to stay a while and have a chat. My easy, quiet manner must have made them believe my story. I am charismatic enough to pull something like that off. So they sat talking with me in a friendly way for several minutes. But although I answered them in the same way I always had, I soon had begun to wish that they would go. My head hurt suddenly, and there was a strange sound in my ears suddenly, and I just had to talk more and faster to cover it up, but the sound became clearer. And still they sat and talked with me. Suddenly I knew that the sound was not in my ears. It couldn't have been. It wasn't just inside my head. It couldn't be. And at that moment, I must have become quite white myself, but still talked faster and louder. The sound too, as it became louder, it seemed to come through the walls, a sound that I knew so well, maybe through the floors. Through the floors. Louder it became and louder, still. And why did the men not go? Louder and louder. I just stood up and walked quickly around the room, pushed my chair across the floor, tried to make noise and tried to cover up that terrible sound, talking even louder still. But the men sat and smiled. They would not leave. Still they talked. And was it even possible that they couldn't hear? No, they had her. They had her. I was certain of it. They knew. Now was them who were playing the game with me, and I who was suffering more than I could bear, just from their smiles and the weight of their grins, from that sound, louder and louder it grew still. Suddenly, I could bear it no longer. I pointed at the boards myself and cried, "Yes, I killed him, yes. Pull up the boards, you'll see. I killed him. But why doesn't the heart stop beating? Why won't it stop?" Hope you enjoyed that. Thank you, guys.